Okay, hey folks, I believe that we are live here now. I'm going to go ahead and just start sharing my screen. And so folks, if you could let me know in the chat function that you are able to see my screen. It should say building the soil. I'm just going to go ahead and pop that into presenter mode. Perfect. Let me know if you're able to see my screen in the chat function, and we will go from there. All right, I think we're all just about settled in, seeing a whole bunch of hellos, and I'm seeing some, yes, I can see the screen. Hey, Nicole. Hey, Colleen. Hey, Jason. Right on. Hey, Val. I saw Kristen's on here as well. Kristen, I dropped off some seedling mix for her yesterday. She started a whole bunch of tomatoes in our plant babies, and they've been, or a whole bunch of tomatoes in our seedling mix, and those plant babies, they've been thriving. Okay, well, looks like everybody is able to see the screen here, which I absolutely love. And so what we're going to do is just start hopping straight in here. And so for those of you that are on a happy hour for the first time here, want to do a couple of housekeeping items to get started. So the first piece is that any questions that you have over the course of the session, go ahead and fire those into the chat function. And so I've seen a bunch of folks sharing where it is that they're dialing in from. So the question that I want to ask on this front to make sure that everybody knows where the chat function is which number of happy hours is this that you're on? Is this your first happy hour that you've ever been on? Second, third, fourth, more than that? Let me know how many happy hours you have been on so you get a bit of a feel for who all we have here. On top of that, as you can see, I have the happy hour shirt on here. This is a Thursday evening. I was just out in the garden not too long ago. The sun was shining. It's starting to feel like spring. So with that being said, go ahead, pour yourself a drink, whether that's a beer or a wine, cocktail, mocktail, water, tea, anything in between, and begin just kicking back and relaxing. Hey to Megan on her first happy hour here. Great to have you. And the third and final piece for our housekeeping items is, if possible, sit somewhere else to where you work over the course of the week. Really want to begin switching out of being in working mode and into just rest and relaxation, because that is what gardening is all about. All righty, so I can see a whole bunch of folks that have been on for multiple, and then a whole bunch of folks that are on their first one here as well. Hey, Janice on her first happy hour. Wayne, great to have you again here. Marlene, more than 4, love it. So for those of you that are on your first happy hour who I may not have met yet before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, and we approach things a little bit differently in that we are entirely focused on connecting individuals to the mental health benefits of gardening. So for our more experienced gardeners that are on the call here this evening, I know that one of the big reasons why you're looking forward to the season ahead and the days getting longer and warmer is because of how calming, how peaceful, how restorative the garden is. And for those of you that are on the newer side to gardening, I know that it can be a little bit daunting, a little bit overwhelming. And so a huge part of our responsibility here at Mind and Soil is to be helping take as much of the guesswork out of gardening as possible to help you more quickly tap into its mental health benefits. And so the biggest thing that I can encourage and recommend you to do at the moment here is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Right below the video here, there's a little red button that says subscribe. And we put out new videos every single week. Tomorrow morning, we're setting one up on 3 different DIY raised bed setups. And any question that you leave on a video over the course of the season is going to get an answer from me within 24 hours. So really going to be here supporting you, holding your hand all through the gardening season. Now, if you were on our last happy hour, you'd know that we had a new individual that was lending a hand in the chat function there, the one and only Mandy. And so this time for today, Mandy's actually going to do a quick little introduction here, say hi to everybody, and then she's going to be in the chat function, answering questions, sharing resources. But I want to pass it over to Mandy here to let her do a quick little hello to everybody. So Mandy, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited for tonight's happy hour and to be spending this evening in the chat with you guys. So come over and pop over your questions over there, and I'll get to as many as I can. Don't be worried about any that I don't manage to get to. Jordan is going to overlook whatever gets missed at the end of the happy hour. So we will be sure that you get your answers you need tonight.
Absolutely. And so on that front, Mandy, she does a lot of the seed starting over at West Coast Seeds, lending a hand over there. I'm not sure, Mandy, just one last question for you. How many seeds would you say that you have started over the course of the last week here?
Oh my goodness. So I am just getting started on our seedling sale that happens this May at West Coast Seeds. And just an example of that is 10,000 seedlings alone, let alone our trials that we do from seeds that get sent in from all over the world. And we try them out in the fields there. So probably so far this spring, probably about 40,000 seeds so far.
Unreal. So yeah, we've got an amazing resource in Mandy with us. Again, questions that you have over the course of the happy hour, whether they're gardening related or specific to the soils, fire those into the chat function and we'll get them answered. Now, speaking of the soils, let's begin kind of diving in here, folks. And I got a bit of a confession that I got to make for everybody here. So in one of my very first years of gardening, where I was really starting to get into it, 2016, I yielded a whopping 1 tomato. So everybody that's on here that might be in your first season of gardening, I'm very confident that you're going to have a better first year of gardening than my first year. And you know that whole thing, how people say like, there's nothing that tastes better than a homegrown tomato. That is not the case. This one tomato that I grew, it tasted miserable. And part of why that was the case was because I bought this little tomato seedling. I brought it back to my garden when I was in Australia at that time, and I did nothing with the soil. I just popped it into the ground and was kind of off to the races, and did not do anything to be giving it the nutrition that it needed to, one, grow well, put out lots of fruit, and ultimately taste really good. But since then, over the last 5 to 6 years, I have just been learning and studying and learning and studying and consuming so much gardening information and content and knowledge. And if there's one word that I would use to describe kind of my gardening style or methodology, it is experimental. I love running little experiments to figure things out, to understand which variables have an impact on how a plant grows. And with that approach, each and every year, I've been getting better and better bounties and harvests and yields, ultimately culminating in 2021, this harvest here being one of the many harvests that I got out of my garden. So I'm confident that if you utilize the pieces that we share with you this evening, all that knowledge that I want to pass along to you, you're going to have a first harvest, or whichever harvest you might be in, that's more close to what I did in 2021 versus what I had in 2016. So if you're all set for us to begin diving in here, then go ahead. You know what I'm about to say. Type it into the chat function. Let's grow. And as those begin to kind of pile into the chat function there, I want to break tonight's session into 5 key chunks. So we're first going to talk a little bit about soil and just why it matters and why we want to be really building that soil. Then once we have that kind of like high level understanding of soil, we're then going to talk through some recipes for containers. So what do we do and how do we put together a soil that's going to perform really well for our containers? Then the next piece that we're going to cover off on after that is when it comes to establishing new in-ground beds and raised beds, what do we do? And then the kind of last pieces that we're going to cover off on is for those established beds that we have, how do we go about rejuvenating that soil so that it's all set and ready to go for the season ahead? And then, folks, the last thing that we're covering off on, I am so excited to be sharing it with you. And this is where we're going to kind of like take a little bit of a step out of soils. And I'm going to kind of take you into my experimenting mindset and walk you through something that I'm doing in the garden right now that I'm so excited about. So that last piece, when to be transplanting, I'm going to cover off on with a little experiment that I'm running. So I can see a whole bunch of let's grow in the chat function there. Let's begin diving in here. And we really want to get started with like, why is this soil thing important? And so as you know, I very frequently refer to our plants as plant babies. And they're not dissimilar to a little baby or a child child, toddler, in that they require nutrients or nutrition to grow. And when they're really tiny and small in their first years of life as a toddler or first weeks of life as a plant, they don't require too much nutrition. But as we get them out into the sun, into the garden beds, they're really looking to go through a big growth spurt. And so we need to ensure that in the soil, they have the nutrients that they need to be growing big and strong. And so when it comes to plants, this breaks down into two key areas: macronutrients and micronutrients. So our macronutrients, that is your N, your P, your K: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. When you're at a garden center or a nursery and you see the different bags of soil or potentially the containers of fertilizer, and they have 3 numbers on it, those are your macronutrients that the plants need to thrive. But then they also need those micronutrients. So it needs to be a little bit more robust than just those 3 pieces. Now, as they begin to put on their growth, how are they doing that? Well, they're doing that by utilizing the nutrients that are in the soil. And so what started as maybe a really lush and bountiful soil, ultimately the nutrients begin to diminish, 1, through the plant utilizing them to put on all that growth, but then 2, on top of that, with just time and weather, we lose some of the nutrients and the nutrition in there. And so if we were to be going out to the garden and planting, and we haven't done anything to be building the soil, then we could be planting it into a space that has no nutrition, just as I did in 2016 and didn't have an absolutely amazing harvest or yield bounty. So if there's one thing that I want you to take from our session this evening, it is that we want to be building the soil. And this is something that we do on an ongoing basis. And there's 3 key pillars that we're going to focus on when it comes to building the soil. And so the 3 pieces that we utilize for building the soil, the first one is organic compost. And so when we think about those nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then the micronutrients, where do those come from? Well, if we were using a synthetic fertilizer, they're essentially distilled, almost like a vitamin, where it's just like pure N, pure P, pure K, and the plant will utilize some of it, but in a lot of instances, it's too much, it goes to waste. So another place that we can find that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium is in banana peels, eggshells, coffee grounds. And as those break down, decompose in the form of compost, the nutrients get freed up for the plants to be putting it to use. And so organic compost is something that we want to be using really as the foundation of our beds to ensure that there is a steady supply throughout that bed of nutrition and microbial life for the plants to be growing big and strong. And then right at the base of the plant, right in that root zone where we're going to be growing, there are 2 additional pieces that we want to be focusing on. And that is worm castings, and that is organic fertilizer. So worm castings, that's going to be more organic matter, but in this instance, it's gone through the digestive tract of a worm, and that's where it's been coated with enzymes and bacteria, where it's just one of those like kind of miracles of Mother Nature that process, that specific digestive tract, ends up being really beneficial for plants. And our organic fertilizer is just going to be a really nice boost of nutrients right in that root zone to ensure that our plants are all set and ready to grow for the season. So these are the 3 pieces that we want to be focusing on for the season here: is organic compost, worm castings, and organic fertilizer. So let's now start bringing it to life. How do we utilize these throughout the garden? And we're going to get started with grow bags and containers. And I'm going to give you a recipe so that you can be filling up your grow bags and containers here. And so when it comes to grow bags, like I don't view this as something that should be done or utilized only by individuals that are growing in a small space. There is a lot of benefit for anybody, experienced or new, small space, large space, to be utilizing grow bags, because it is a great way to be learning your yard, your space, and how the sun moves throughout it. So before just kind of jumping into doing a big infrastructure project like putting in raised beds or a greenhouse, first spend a season growing with grow bags. And what you're going to find is that you're able to really track the sun and determine, is this the best place to be making that infrastructure investment? And if you notice that the sun's actually in a different part of your yard, you can simply move those grow bags over there, which ensures that one, you're making the most of that season, and two, you're making the most of that future infrastructure investment, ensuring that it is in the right part of your yard. So how do we fill these grow bags up? Well, the base that we're going to build consists of three key pieces: compost, coco coir, and perlite. And so how we go about this is that we need to first measure them out. And so what we're going to do is 3 parts compost. And so I grabbed some 5-gallon pails there, and I'm just filling them to the top, full 5 gallons with compost. So I've got those measured out. Each of them are filled. Now I'm going over to the coco coir, which is a bit of a medium to loosen it up and make it a little bit lighter. And that is where we're going to use 2 parts coco coir. And then the last thing is our perlite for some drainage. And I'm going to fill up my 5-gallon pail. So I've got my 3 parts compost, my 2 parts coco coir right in the middle, and my third my 1 part perlite as the third input that we're utilizing. Once we have those measured out, then what we need to be doing next is putting down a tarp, or you could do it on the ground and simply mix them up. So I'm dumping them out. I like to start with the lighter ingredients, and I then add the compost on top. And then I grab a shovel and I basically go to the bottom, and I'm just lifting and turning over, lifting and turning over, lifting and turning over, kind of going in a circle around it and just mixing it up as if I'm kind of like making a cake or something like that. And I continue doing that until I end up with a really nice and even consistency that should look something like this. So this is a really, really beautiful medium for our plant babies to be growing in this season when we're in a container or in a grow bag, something along those lines. And so now that we have our mix built out, all that we need to do is be popping it into that container or grow bag that we're growing in. So I'm just shoveling it in there. And you want to leave a couple of inches of space at the top because we're going to be putting some plant babies in there. So we're going to need to have a little bit of room to work with it. Now, I'm going to show us how to transplant, but if you have any questions specific to containers, grow bags, go ahead, fire those into the chat function. I'm going to answer 2 of them before we begin talking about in-ground beds and what to be doing on that front. And so when it comes to transplanting into these, we do need to wait a little bit until it's a little bit warmer. But when that time does come, that's when we're going to be utilizing those other 2 inputs, the worm castings and the organic fertilizer. So what we do on this front when it comes to transplanting a little bit warmer out is we use our hori-hori knife and we dig a little bit of a hole here. And then we grab 1 handful of worm castings. And we go ahead and we pop that into the hole that we just dug there. And then 1 tablespoon of our 444 superfood, an organic fertilizer. We then mix that around and ensure that we can get our plant in there. And then we take our seedling, which is growing so well, and we fill it in there, add a little bit more and compact that down so it's in there nice and snug. And then we do a top dressing of 1 handful of worm castings and that 1 more tablespoon of superfood, using my hori-hori knife to bring it out and pop it in there. So versatile, that tool. And the last piece is just giving it a really nice big drink of water. And that baby right there is all set, ready to go. It is going to be thriving. This is exactly what I did with my kale last season. And when it came to like being in the midst of the season, I had so much coming out of the garden that I was going to my neighbors with little bouquets of it in water that I was leaving on their doorsteps of kale, Swiss chard, some other leafy greens in there. They are going to be thriving in that mixture and with that transplanting technique there. Okay, so going to see and answer 2 questions in here. Okay, so this is actually one that I was asked yesterday. Jordan, what are your thoughts on seaweed in the garden? So this is a really cool question, and it isn't something that I have played around with yet. So I can't speak to it from a perspective of how has it worked. But you know, seaweed, say kelp meal, that is a really good product to be utilizing and adding and feeding into the soil in order to be building that base. So I believe that seaweed or kelp would be good products to be incorporating into the garden. Now, what I don't know is how much or in what way. Do you layer them on top? Do you dry them and ground them out and work them into the soil? Do you put them first through the compost yet? Those are all questions that I would have, that I would be experimenting with in order to figure out what works best. And so how I would go about doing that is I would determine, okay, I want to just lay the seaweed on the top of the bed. And I'm only going to do that for half of my bed so that I can compare it to the other half and see, is there a noticeable difference? And then maybe in the following season, I would do more, like 2 layers on the top, or maybe I would break it down into a finer material. So that is like seaweed is something that I would be really interested in playing around with. And that's the methodology that I would take in terms of experimenting and playing around with it. Hope that answered the question there. Okay, great question from Becky here. And Becky asked, Jordan, what about rejuvenating old soil from containers and bags? And so we're going to talk about rejuvenating later, a little bit later on in the presentation, but that's going to be specific to kind of like in-ground beds and raised beds. So how do we go about rejuvenating a container like this? Well, if you wanted to have kind of like the lowest effort approach, you could just add at the beginning of the season a couple of inches of compost onto the top. So you'd leave it as is, you'd add a couple of inches of compost, and that would be, like what you would be doing for the kind of the lowest impact or lowest effort approach. If you wanted to be doing something a little bit more intensive, but probably better for the plants, is I would dump all of the containers and the pots that you have out onto the ground or onto that tarp. And I would then add about 25% new fresh compost. And I would mix that all up. And then I would put them back into the containers, back into the grow bags. You can do that with grow bags. You can disturb the soil a little bit more because we are not developing a soil ecosystem that's sprawling 10 feet in one direction. We need to depend a little bit more on readily available nutrients in that season. So Becky, that's the kind of 2 approaches that you would take when it comes to rejuvenating your grow bags, your containers. Hope that that has been helpful. If you've got follow-up questions on that piece, feel free to leave it as a comment on any of the videos, because again, those all get answered within 24 hours there. Alrighty, so I'm gonna have a quick sip of water here, and then we're going to dive into the next piece. And that is all around in-ground beds. And we're going to break this into 2 areas. So first, we're going to talk about what would we do if we were growing quite literally into the ground. And then the second piece is if we did not want to remove the grass, what do we do to grow on top of that grass and build out a raised bed? So diving in with the first one, which is completely in ground. What we would be doing in this instance is kind of like, well, to take a bit of a step back first here, this is my front yard here where I had grass last year. And so over the course of the fall and the winter here, I removed all of that grass. I got really deep down onto it and pulled all of it out. I've moved it into my backyard. And so there should not be any seeds, any grass still in there. It should just be a blank canvas. But when I say blank canvas, it quite literally is a blank canvas. We have no nutrition in there whatsoever, because what we're now working with is effectively the backfill that my house was built on. And what that's going to consist of is essentially 100% sand, silt, and clay. Lots and lots of minerals, but 0% on the organic matter front. So that means there's no nutrients and probably very little life in there as well. And so rather than just piling compost on top and beginning to grow on top of it, we want to actually incorporate that. Because if we didn't, we would then have these 2 very distinct layers. Let's say that we have 3 inches of compost that we can be utilizing. That would give us 3 inches of 100% compost. And then it would essentially hit this table below it of 100% sand, silt, and clay. And that would not be favorable for the plants. What would be much better for our plants is if that was all blended together and created a consistent 6-inch foundation of the fill, the sand, the silt, the clay, and the organic matter in the form of compost. So I think that the topic of tilling is kind of like a hot topic, and people are either in the camp of like no dig, no till, or doing tilling. And I think that there is a place and a time for both of them. And when we're establishing a new bed like this into the ground, we want to go about tilling so that we don't have two distinct layers, but rather one consistent layer. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we first get a heck of a lot of compost. And so what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing basically wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of compost here. There's the third one, and here is the fourth one, and then the fifth one. And then what I'm doing in this instance is I am rototilling that into the area where I am establishing that new bed. And with that rototiller, I'm trying to get down as deep as possible, because that's going to just give me a larger base to be working off of that I can build up year over year. And so after I've tilled all that into the soil, how are we looking? We're going in the right direction. Things are looking better, but it really ate that compost up pretty quickly. We can see some of it, but it's still looking a little bit gray, a little bit sandy. And so what am I thinking here as I'm building this out? I'm thinking I want more organic matter in there. So I'm grabbing more compost. I've got a fever, and the only prescription to it is more compost at the moment here. So there's a second wheelbarrow, third wheelbarrow, fourth wheelbarrow, and our fifth wheelbarrow. And then I'm grabbing my tiller, and now look at it. Now we're building that really beautiful, consistent soil in there. And there's all this sand and silt and clay that's now mixed in with the organic matter, and it's going down several inches. So all that I need to be doing now that I've worked in all that organic matter is simply grabbing, say, some rocks, putting them around the outside. And folks, we have a beautiful new bed here in my front yard, ready to go for the season. Nice like depth to it that's going beneath and lower than where those rocks are, and plenty of organic matter in there to provide those nutrients for our plant babies. And the beauty of an approach like this is that as we go into year 2, I could just put another layer of rocks on top here and then add more organic matter into those beds, continue to build that soil ecosystem, and it's staying right in that space. But now, rather than being 6 inches, it's maybe like 8 or 9 inches. And I can just do that by adding that layer of rocks in there. So that's what we want to be doing when it comes to an in-ground bed. Now let's continue along into the backyard. What do we do from a raised bed perspective? What if you're in a position where you're like, I don't want to basically remove 30 feet of sod from my yard? I, in a lot of instances also do not want to do that, but I wanted to go through that process in my front yard and really begin to shift and change it. But there's a much easier way to be going about doing this. And that is truly like that Charles Dowding, no dig, no till beds approach. And so if there's anybody that is not familiar with Charles Dowding, he's this like amazing gardener over in the UK, has an incredible, phenomenal, beautiful market garden over there. And he basically gardens in 100% compost. And I put this to the test last year. I made a bed that had 100% compost in it, and right beside it, the exact same amount of size, had a soil blend, and the 100% compost bed grew just as well, and for some vegetables, even better than the soil blend. And so he has a YouTube channel. If you're ever looking for something to watch on the gardening front, I really encourage you to check out his channel, because it's basically like the most relaxing, calming thing to watch. He just kind of takes you on a little journey through his garden and speaks in this really soft, beautiful British accent. Anytime that I'm a little stressed, a little bit anxious, I throw in some Charles, and everything feels a-okay. So Charles Dowding, really amazing channel and really big on this raised bed approach. So let's build out one of these beds. Now, rather than removing all that grass, all that we have to do is pop down cardboard. And so what I'm doing here is I'm laying cardboard over the area where I want to be establishing my new raised bed. And so I personally, I go really, you're kind of like generous on this front. I like to make sure that there are at least 2 to 3 layers of cardboard, right? If we're going to go to the effort of putting this all down, let's make sure that there is no grass coming through. And so with 2 to 3 layers of cardboard, that's ensuring that there are not any little holes, nooks, crannies, crevices for the grass to be shooting through from. And over the course of about 9 months, the grass below is going to die off. If you look at like just to the right of me there, that whole area, that all used to be grass, but I put cardboard down and now have, as you can see, about a 12-inch soil base that I'm working off of. So all the grass dies off, but also the cardboard, that's just organic matter as well. It decomposes over those 9 months and just basically decomposes right into the soil. So it's a really, really amazing low labor way to begin establishing a new raised bed in your yard. So now that I've got the cardboard down, all that I need to, oh wait, hold on. I've got one piece that I need to ask, and that is when it comes to cardboard and boxes, pizza boxes specifically, let me know in the chat function. I need to know, are we Team Domino's or Team Panago? I used to be very, very heavily favored towards one of these. However, over the course of the last maybe month or so, I've shifted to one of the other ones. So I want to hear in the chat function if the pizza preference for you is Domino's or Panago. I'll share my thoughts at the very end down there. Okay, I'm seeing some Panagos coming through. Amazing. All righty. So what we now do is we put our raised bed right on top of that cardboard. So I'm bringing over the wood here. This is an 8-foot by 6.5-foot raised bed. I put the wood down. I put either nails or screws through it to connect them all. And then I add the third layer in there. And then I connect all of those. And in just a matter of a couple of minutes, we have brand new raised bed ready to go. Oh, I'm seeing a Pizza Hut in the chat there. Too good. Alrighty. So with the bed now in place, the only thing that we need to do is just add our soil base in. And this is where we can go with that Charles Dowding approach of 100% compost. Now, if you wanted to have a little bit more kind of lightness and a little bit more drainage in there, you could use those two same inputs that we discussed earlier, the cocoa core and the perlite, as a means to kind of make it, again, a little bit lighter and a little bit more drainage in there. So anywhere from 100% compost to 75% compost is going to be a really great place for you to be kind of, building that initial soil foundation out of. You could also go with, instead of perlite, you could utilize sand. Sand's just a little bit heavier. So if you were to grab a 5-gallon pail, just as I did when I was filling up that container, those grow bags, a 5-gallon pail of sand is going to be a lot heavier than a 5-gallon pail of perlite or vermiculite, either one of those. So that would be the kind of reason why you'd go with that instead of, say, sand. Alrighty, so I am now going to go back into transplanting into this bed, but if you have any questions on raised beds, in-ground beds, go ahead, fire those into the chat function there. I'm going to answer 1 to 2 of them before we begin talking about rejuvenating. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about transplanting into a raised bed. And folks, it is the exact same approach here. So take a look at this. I grab my hori knife, which has a measuring tape on it, and I dig down into the bed there. And then once I've got my hole established, 1 handful of worm castings and a tablespoon of the 444 superfood. I once again massage that in. I grab my plant baby. I backfill with that surrounding soil that I have, and then 1 more handful of worm castings and a tablespoon of the 444 superfood. And that kale baby is now all set, ready to grow, and is going to be absolutely thriving this season. So it's really, really straightforward. Once we kind of have that bed established, we just need to have our worm castings and our organic fertilizer on hand, and that's setting the plant up to absolutely be thriving. Colleen and Jason, they're ready to be growing. I got the chance to walk through their garden over in Victoria. It is absolutely beautiful. Okay, Anne, amazing question here. So Anne asked, how deep should a raised bed be? Different for different vegetables. Amazing question here, Anne. So Anne, the deeper that you can go, the larger the soil base that you can build, the better. And so if you're going to the store and you're buying lumber to establish a raised bed, I would encourage you to go with at least 2 inches by 8 inches in height. Use that as like a minimum to go off of. And it might be a little bit of an investment in terms of like the soil and the wood, but you're going to set yourself up for tons of success into the future. You could go 10 inches, you could go 12 inches, you could even go 16 inches. I went for a walk yesterday down at one of the community gardens, and I saw an individual that had put down about a 6-inch piece of wood, and they had braced around the outside of it, and this year put a new set of 6 inches. So now they have the ability to go up to 12 inches. So wherever you kind of get started with, do know that as the seasons roll along, you can add another piece of wood on top there to keep on building that soil base higher and higher. Amazing question there, Anne. I absolutely love it. Okay, so great question here from Christine. And there was one that came up a little bit earlier asking about peat moss. So Christine's question is, what can we use instead of coco coir? I find it hard to find. And so peat moss is the traditional medium that would have been utilized here. In the past, folks would have gone 3 parts compost, 2 parts peat moss, 1 part perlite. However, peat moss is kind of the least sustainable of the mediums, which is why you see a lot of folks that are shifting towards coco coir. And so if you can't find coco coir, you could go with peat moss. That would be an option for you. Now, the direction that I am, looking and fingers crossed wanting to go towards is that there's this new product called pit moss, PITT MOSS, and it's not available in Canada yet. I'm trying to get in touch with their team to start distributing it here in Canada, but it is a recycled paper, essentially like a recycled cardboard product that works in place of a peat moss or a coco coir. So that is kind of an even more sustainable option on that front. And so if you didn't want to go with peat moss and you weren't able to find coco coir, then you could, again, go down that path of not utilizing it and just being in that category of 100% compost. So that's kind of the answer to that question, as well as additional light on peat moss versus coco coir versus pit moss there. Okay. And so those are 2 questions there, but I saw one more that I wanted to be answering. And that was just in terms of, from Stacy here. Where is the best place to buy compost? Manure has so much bark mulch in it. So Stacy, amazing question there. And so what you can do if you're in a smaller space and you're buying compost by the bag, sea soil is a great option to be going with. You could buy it by the bag. It's going to be a really good medium to be going with. And then if you're looking for like a larger amount, so kind of like by the yard, then you're going to want to find a soil depot in your area, and you're going to want to go with their organic compost amender. So again, that's their organic compost amender. I encourage you to go with that instead of any of their blends, like their vegetable blend or their garden blend, because usually those are just filled with sand. And so it's like you're just paying for sand instead of organic matter in the form of really good compost. And if when you get it, you take a look at it and there's a little bit too much bark mulch in there for you, or too much kind of like woody product in there for you, then what you can do is grab a 1/2-inch sift, so like chicken wire or chicken fencing, and you can build a little sift and you can sift out a whole bunch of those larger chunks. So again, that's just kind of like, you could put it in there as is. If you want to go to that next step, doing a little bit more effort, a little bit more work, that's how you'd be able to get rid of some of it if you weren't able to readily find something that didn't have all that compost in there. Amazing questions. These are so good. So we're going to continue along here just kind of out of interest of time. But as mentioned, I'm going to stay online towards the end there to answer a couple more questions there. And we've got Mandy answering a whole bunch of them in the chat. So we are doing good. And so what that means is that we are ready to begin talking about rejuvenating our beds. What do we do right around now as we lead into the season? And the beauty here, folks, is that if we have done these pieces, so if we have worked organic matter into the ground, or we've built a raised bed that has lots of it in it, then we have been developing a beautiful soil ecosystem. So remember at the very beginning, I mentioned those macronutrients, the N, the P, the K, and the macro or in the micronutrients. And those would be like in the form of, again, like a banana peel or eggshells, coffee grounds. It is the microorganisms in the soil that are eating away at it. And as they eat away at it, it's at that point that the nutrients become available for the plant to put them to use. Those little microorganisms are living in the soil. And so after that first year, we do not want to be tilling, because if we tilled all that up, we'd be killing all of them. We'd be killing their different networks down there. And then we'd be basically starting from scratch. So after year one, we want to do no tilling and just allow that soil ecosystem to be developing. And so all that we need to do in terms of rejuvenating, this is the beauty of it. It just like, it gets easier over time, is that we simply add compost onto the top of the beds, because then beneath the surface, we can see that beautiful ecosystem down there living and thriving, and our plants being able to get access to nutrients at multiple times throughout the season and through multiple parts of the bed. And the way that we go about doing that is simply by adding compost onto the top of the bed. And so what I'm doing in this instance is I'm going to all of my beds and rejuvenating them by adding 1 to 2 inches of compost onto the top of the bed there. So I basically kind of put down some wheelbarrows, and then I'm just taking, either a fork or a shovel and smoothing that out across the bed, disturbing that ecosystem, that soil base and foundation as little as possible. When I added all that compost in there, that was a great amount of new nutrients that are making their way into the bed, new microorganisms that are going to get to work breaking it all down. And when we are doing that habitually on a multi-time per year basis, that bed is building and always going to be in really, really good shape. It is an absolute thing of beauty. And so the last piece that we need to be doing is just transplanting, and it would be the exact same process. I don't think that we need to go through that video kind of for a third time here, because it is that same process where all that we're going to do in this bed that has now been rejuvenated is dig our hole, pop 1 handful of worm castings in there, a tablespoon of organic fertilizer such as our 444 superfood, and then backfill with the surrounding soil. And then again, a top dressing of a handful of worm castings and a tablespoon of 444 superfood. All righty. So with that being said, those are the key principles to building our soil and getting it into a beautiful place for the season ahead. Those 3 things that I talked you through, that's all that I've been utilizing in my garden. And as I mentioned and showed you in that picture earlier, it's getting better and better each and every year. So if you go down that same path of utilizing those and establishing your beds in that manner, and then rejuvenating and building the soil on an ongoing basis, I guarantee that you're going to end up with beautiful, beautiful leafy greens coming out of the garden, amazing heads of cabbage coming through. And remember that tomato that I mentioned at the beginning? We got a heck of a lot more of them now. And my goodness, they taste good. I'm dreaming about them this coming season. And I know it's just around the corner. And the beauty of this is that we have so many folks in our community that have been utilizing our transplant kit and having tons of success with it. I think that I saw Bonnie in the chat function here. Take a look at her backyard here and just how well everything was growing. And that was in her first year of gardening. So our transplant kit is absolutely perfect for this. And what's included in that are 3 bags of our worm castings and 1 bag of our 444 superfood. And so from now until the end of the weekend, we are offering free shipping on that all across Canada. And so any orders that come through by the end of the weekend, they're getting free shipping. Any orders that have come through this evening, Mike, who you also see in the chat function there, he's shipping all of those out by noon tomorrow. So we're getting things out to each and every one of you super quickly here. And if you want to place an order for this to get it shipped for free to your house, the link is directly below this video of me in the description there. You can click on there and the free shipping code is already applied. But I want you to hang tight for one moment on placing your order. I know some of you are going over there right now and you're placing your order. If you're doing that, just hang tight for 1 second, because remember at the very beginning here, I shared with you that I'm doing a little bit of an experiment on my end. And so what I need you to do right now is take everything that I say from now until kind of like 5 minutes from now with a grain of salt, because these pieces that I presented, I'm very confident. Now I'm taking you inside my kind of like experimental mindset, the things that I'm playing around with. So this is kind of out and now into Jordan's experiment mind. And the big question here is, when do I go about transplanting? And so the kind of like established principles on this front are that our cold crops, we want to wait until we have an average nighttime low of 8 Celsius. So that'd be, say, kale, peas, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli. That's what we're looking for. And then for our warmer weather crops, we want to be looking at 10 Celsius. So for our tomatoes, our peppers, our squashes, zucchinis, etc. And in a lot of instances, it's actually 12 Celsius that a lot of people recommend. I've already been able to kind of push that down to 10 Celsius without losing anything. So I'm confident on that. But again, take everything I say right now with a grain of salt, because what doesn't quite make sense to me is that we can be direct sowing some things out in the garden right now, and the average nighttime low is much lower than 8 Celsius. So it's gotten me really curious about how early could we actually go about transplanting. And so what I've been doing is I've been starting to play around with, how can I push this? How can I understand what's actually happening? And there is one tool that I am so just absolutely fascinated and loving at the moment, and that is called the min-max thermometer. And so this min-max thermometer, what it does is that it tells you what the minimum and the maximum temperature is in your backyard where you're growing. And so when we look at this picture here, there's 3 dials. There's a black one in the middle here, a red one here, and a blue one on this side. And so as the day kind of goes from morning into the afternoon and it's getting warmer, that black dial is the real temperature. And it goes from 12 to 13 to 14, 15, 16, 17, up to 18. And let's say that's like 4 p.m., peak of the day, peak of the heat, but it doesn't go any harder than that. It pushed that red dial to right there. And then as we get into the evening, it starts getting cooler and cooler and cooler until we get to 3, 4 in the morning, where it then pushes the blue dial to the minimum temperature, the coolest temperature that we got in our day, which in this instance was 1 Celsius. So now, rather than you having to kind of get up in the middle of the night or anything like that to see what temperature it is in your backyard, you can be utilizing this min-max thermometer in order to figure out what the temperature is. So for myself, in kind of experiment mode, I was thinking, okay, first thing I want to know is my backyard the same as the weather application? And so what I've done over the course of March is that I have been tracking the weather. And so at the beginning of March, the average nighttime low that my weather app was telling me was that it was going to be -1 and then 0, all the way up to 3, then back down to -4. And this is the weather from Squamish area. But I want to know, is that the case in my backyard? So every single day I've been going out there looking at my min-max thermometer to understand, okay, is that the case or is it different? And what I've found is that in my backyard, my microclimate that I'm growing in is actually a little bit warmer most of the time. It's kind of 1 to 2 degrees warmer than what we're seeing in the weather app. So I've already got a little bit of insight that's allowing me to more intimately know my gardening zone. But then I started thinking through, okay, if I want to be at 8 Celsius for my cool weather crops and 10 Celsius for my warm weather crops, is there anything that I can be doing to get us going in that direction a little bit earlier? And so what I have been playing around with are these types of structures, DIY greenhouses. And I was really interested in this because A greenhouse, during the middle of the day, it traps the air in there, which is why it gets warmer. And so it gets really nice and warm during the daytime, but there's no insulation on there. So I had no idea as to whether or not the soil and that space was staying warmer through the nighttime. So I put one of the min-max thermometers right in there. Take a look. You can see that one right there in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. That's one that's on that bed. And then just about 4 feet over, that's where I have the second min-max thermometer. And so every day I've been going out there, I've been opening it up, I've got my notebook, I've been taking a look at the min-max thermometer, I'm doing an experiment with all these garlic babies, and I'm seeing, oh, that's a little bit warmer than that 1 Celsius that we were seeing. And so I've been tracking all that down there. So folks, take a look at this now. When I have that greenhouse over top, it is even warmer here. When it was about 2 Celsius outside, or sorry, the actual weather there was about 6. It was 8 within the greenhouse. So I'm seeing every single day inside that little greenhouse, that DIY greenhouse, that it is about 2 to 3 degrees warmer than outside. And so I now know that if I'm utilizing structures like that, then I'm pushing forward my window. I'm extending my gardening season by several weeks at the beginning of the year, as well as at the end of the year as we go into the fall. So it's an amazing, beautiful way to be doing that. And like for myself as a gardener, I'm just getting better. I'm learning more. I'm more knowledgeable. And so I want you to take a look at this. I popped one of those greenhouses out, and take a look at how much bigger and more beautiful the plants are growing when they were inside that structure and having a little bit more warmth than just outside of it there. So I have been absolutely loving the minimum maximum thermometer. So the one last piece that I wanted to leave you with was that if you wanted to purchase your transplant kit, you can get the Hori Hori knife that I was utilizing all throughout while transplanting, or you could get the min-max thermometer as an add-on, and you get $15 off on each of those, plus the free shipping. So if you're looking to kind of like add those tools that will allow you to further upskill as a gardener, perfect time to be doing it. And we'll pop that into the box, get it out to you straight away. Again, all orders kind of this evening. We're shipping by noon tomorrow. Everything else will have free shipping until the end of the weekend, and will be out the door the beginning of next week. But folks, that is everything that I wanted to cover off on. I would absolutely love to hear if this has been valuable and useful in the chat function. If you're feeling more comfortable, more confident going into the gardening season with a plan for your soils here. And on top of that, let me know if there are any questions here. So go ahead and begin kind of firing through any questions that you might have, and we'll answer a few of those here. All righty. Although it's kind of looking like Mandy might have already gotten to most of the questions. Okay, question from GEH4. Regarding the DIY greenhouse, would you expect to see a similar effect, perhaps with lower temperature difference, using a floating row cover? Yeah, so I would imagine that there would be a little bit of a bump in there as well. And that's where like for myself, I'm utilizing 3 of those min-max thermometers outside because I want to see like, okay, is it warmer in that environment with the row cover versus one of those DIY kind of like boxes or environments. And the best way to do that is to have like those tools on hand to be ordered to play around with it and see in your microclimate what's happening and what the differences might actually be. And on top of that, those DIY greenhouses, I'm just going back 2 slides here. You can see this one here. It is literally just like a plastic tote that I had over top there that I bought at a Home Depot, and then drilled some holes into the top of the walls there. So a little bit of ventilation was happening and the air was still kind of getting out from the very top there, would be where it would be getting really warm. So yes, I would, all that to say, yes, I would expect it to be a little bit warmer, but I would want to like put it to the test in form of actually tracking it each day for a couple of weeks. Oh, thank you so much, RK. I'm not sure if that is rolling there, but thank you so much for the words there. Pamela, thank you so much. I massively appreciate that. So Anne, This is a great question. Anne's question is, we used to have great success with zucchini in our raised bed, but not in the last few years. Any suggestions for soil improvements? So, Anne, what I would be doing there is that if I wanted to kind of reset the soil because you're not happy with it, I would add a whole bunch of compost, and I would be tilling that into the soil to be establishing that ecosystem, especially if you have not been adding compost on an ongoing basis in the past. This is very common. People have like an amazing first year or 2 years, but as time goes on, it kind of begins to diminish because there hasn't been that continuous new organic matter being put into the beds. So that's what I'd be doing if I wanted something like kind of easy and straightforward to do. If you wanted to get really technical with it, then Anne, what you can do is you're going to dig down 6 inches into that bed, and you're going to grab 2 cups of the soil. And then you're going to take that soil to a soil testing lab, such as Element, and you're going to tell them, I want to grow zucchinis. In about 3 days, they're going to send a report back to you that's going to tell you what is in your soil, like how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potassium, and what you need to be adding in order for it to be ideal for zucchinis to be growing. So that is like the kind of most black and white way of understanding, I'm trying to grow this crop, and therefore, based on where my soil is currently at, it needs X, Y, and Z added into it to be optimal. Great question there. Question from Cynthia, any particular compost better than the others? So that's where, like, you know, going with sea soil is really, really great. If you're going by the bag, that's just going to be like a universally really good option. You're not going to go wrong by utilizing it. And then from there, if you're going to a soil depot, that's where, again, I would ask for their organic compost amender. And if you want to take it a step further, you could ask whether or not it is OMRI, OMRI listed. And that's the organic kind of like certification that companies would be receiving in order to show that they are organic listed. Okay. Oh, Tyne, amazing question. Tyne, I love this question so much. So Tyne asked, do you add new compost before you add succession planting within the same year? Love it, Tyne. So let's go and take a look back at that bed of garlic that I have here. One more, I believe. There we go. Perfect. So Tyne, this bed here is 100% garlic. All 4 foot by 8 foot of it is garlic. And let's call it July 20th that I'm going to be harvesting that garlic out. On July 1st, I'm starting my succession crop in little seed cells. That's going to be beets, that's going to be carrots, that's going to be broccoli. And so those are going to grow in seed cells over the course of those first 20 days of July until the garlic is ready to be harvested. Then on July 20th, the amazing day happens. We harvest all that big, beautiful garlic out of the bed, but that soil, it's kind of been depleted of nutrients because the garlic has been utilizing all of it. So once the garlic is out, I'm then adding about 1 inch of compost into that bed. And then for all of the transplants that I'm going to be putting into that new bed, I'm doing it the exact same way. I'm utilizing worm castings and I'm utilizing the 444 superfood to have that succession crop absolutely thriving into the fall. This year, I'm trying to eat from the garden 365 straight days. And a huge element of that is going to be my succession crop. So this is something that we're going to be chatting about a whole bunch. But yes, I would add compost and then the worm castings and superfood. So if you did grab that right now for everything that you're going to be planting for your spring crop, the extra worm castings, extra superfood that you might have, you're going to put that all to use in a succession crop. Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Kate. Go ahead and grab get your hands on one of those transplant kits there. Perfect. Okay. Question from Adrian here. Where do we get our worm castings from? Yeah, so we have an OMRI, so organic listed partner that provides it. And they've been doing it for about like 23, 24 years. So they've got like their whole system process absolutely dialed, which I absolutely love because I use all of it throughout my garden. I used to utilize my own worm farm for that, but I want to be growing with the exact same things that everybody else in the community is going to be growing with. So I've made the transition to just utilizing all that in my backyard as well. All right, I think I'll answer kind of maybe 1 or 2 more here. And yes, you absolutely could utilize your worm castings from last year. The They're not going to do anything for your garden when they're in the garage, so get them into the beds there. All right. DID with Kaz O'Shea from Phoenix, Arizona. So nice to meet you. I went to University of Arizona. As a matter of fact, my Arizona Wildcats are playing in March Madness right now. So I got to run in a minute in order to catch that game. But amazing to have you on here. I want to make it back down to Arizona at some point here. There's a question, should I be adding lime into the beds? So if you've got a really acidic soil, then you would be adding lime to neutralize the pH of that soil a bit. I've never added it to any of my gardens. I find that compost, because we have so many different inputs that are going in there, it keeps it really neutral and in a place where lime does not need to be added in there. Okay. Okay, question from Anne here. Cats have used my garden bed for a litter box. Can I compost the soil and use it next year? To be honest, I would probably try to get as much of that cat poop out and not into your compost pile. And then if you wanted to like completely turn over that bed, you could get the soil out, but I would try to first remove as much of that cat poop as possible there. So folks, I think that is everything for today. Oh, one last one, but I'll start signing off here. Thank you all so much. Gurmeet asked, where is the link to order? Gurmeet, it is directly below me here. There should be a little line that says free shipping on transplant kits and then a link to it. You can click on that to head over to our website to put in a order there. But folks, that is everything that I wanted to cover off on for today. I'm so excited for the season ahead. All my plant babies are in the little seed starting station right there. They're coming to life and looking really, really happy. The backyard is coming to life as well. I've got an amazing update video coming up on YouTube tomorrow, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And other than that, folks, I'll catch you all on the next happy hour, and that's all going to be focused on hardening off our plant babies and transplanting them into the garden. So I'll catch you all on that one. Have an amazing evening, and I'll see you all soon.